and we will start. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining us for another episode of Leadership Matters with Dr. Sharon. And I am just absolutely excited to have our guest here with us today. You wait until you hear her bio. Dr. Elizabeth Alvarez was born and raised in the southwest side of Chicago. She is a first-generation Mexican and first-generation college graduate. She received her BA at the University of Illinois at Chicago in education and minored in psychology. She continued with her education in completing 2 masters and a PhD through the University of Illinois at Chicago. She received her PhD in curriculum and instruction that focused on narrative, race, and science pedagogy. The title of her dissertation is Rabbit on the Moon, an urban Mexican curriculum story. Liz began her career as a teacher in the Little Village neighborhood. She taught for 13 years, teaching upper grade science. She was privileged and honored to serve as principal for 6 years at John C. Dorr Elementary, a pre-K through 8th grade elementary in Chicago's Clearing neighborhood, where she led the school to level 1+ status. She is currently the chief association, I hope I'm getting that right, Liz.
Chief of schools.
Chief of schools, right, is it District 8?
Network 8.
Okay, exactly. Network 8, Chief of Schools in Chicago Public Schools, where she supports 26 schools in achieving growth and attainment, along with preparing students for college and career readiness. Dr. Alvarez, welcome to Leadership Matters.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited about this. Nervous and excited.
No, I am so excited. And your background is so rich. And I just shared just a little bit about it, but I would love for you to take the opportunity to share just a little more about who Dr. Elizabeth Alvarez is.
All right. My background, as you mentioned, I started off as a teacher and then went into science. I taught in the upper grades. So one of the things that I wanted to kind of share is where I came into storytelling. So I was teaching science to predominantly Latino students who spoke only Spanish. And what I noticed is that they were bringing storytelling into my curriculum. And being taught in the old ways, I was kind of dismissing their storytelling, not realizing that it really provided a bridge to them to understand the concepts that I was trying to teach in science. And so I had a revelation and realized that the storytelling not only is part of all of our stories when we think about our history, but it really is important in education. And so that's when I started working on storytelling in science and finding out the power of story, not only for the teller, but the receivers as well. And so my dissertation goes into different narratives of stories that children shared with me, stories of my own growing up as a Mexican child and then an adult. And here we are now where I'm chief of schools for 26 schools within my network. And they as well are predominantly Latino students there as well. And just remembering in the back the importance of that power of storytelling.
That is absolutely wonderful. And one of the things that really intrigued me when I was reading your background is really the founding of this Latino pipeline to the principalship. My work is around really developing and strengthening my school district's pipeline, that principal pipeline.
Yes.
So we know that that's important work because we need to make sure that the next in line is prepared. So please talk to us just a little bit about your work specifically with Latinos in leadership.
You got it. So first of all, as I mentioned, I had 26 schools in this predominantly Latino neighborhood. If we look at Chicago itself, when we look at Chicago public schools, they're mostly Black and brown children. And so as I immediately started noticing that the teachers that were in our schools were not the same color as our children. And so that became kind of apparent to me. I also noticed that our bilingual teachers were leaving to the suburbs. So that meant that either we're not doing our work right and keeping and retaining our teachers, not only that, but keeping and retaining our leaders as well, our principals. And so myself, another network chief, and a chief of the Office of Language and Culture, we got together one day just to have coffee, started speaking about what was happening in Chicago, noticing that our Latinos were kind of leaving, the leaders, not necessarily our families. And we decided, you know what, we need to give our time to this and begin mentoring. And so we started these Saturday programs. They meet once a month, where we kind of divvy ourselves out. One group talks to principals and APs that would want to be in chief positions, what I am right now. Others talk to if you want to become a principal or an assistant principal. And a role that I have there is maybe you want to be a teacher leader. And what does that look like to be a teacher leader? So might be an instructional support leader, might be a coach. And so there's 3 different cohorts within our Latino pipeline that we support our leaders. Our very first day, we had an abundance of probably like 50 Latino leaders showing up on this Saturday, where we split them all up so that they have now ourselves as kind of like the instructors, and more of like mentors. This then evolved where Dr. Jackson is our CEO, said we could start mentoring them along with retired principals. And so 25 of those 45 are then going to have services, if they would like this, with retired principals. The 3 of us that I just mentioned, the founders, are going to be going through who are the 25 that would be getting this mentorship from retired principals. And hopefully then leading into positions like mine, or even becoming a superintendent somewhere else. But that's the ultimate goal of this.
That's really impactful, because we know across our country the number of students, first of all, that are non-English speaking, and we call them newcomers. I'm not sure what you all call them. Here, it's increasing. And so with the increase of those students, the individuals that are in front of the students need to increase. And I think that's the need that you guys really filled. It's placing those leaders and teacher leaders in place of those students that look like them, as you mentioned. Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about the structure, because the pipeline is something that has been discussed over and over again for the last 5 to 10 years. And we know that the churn of the principalship, retaining those, because it's expensive, first of all, when we have to fill those vacancies and retrain and redevelop.
Exactly.
So what is the structure that you guys have in place as you bring these Latino educators to CPS? Because I can imagine that people are actually coming to your district because of this intentionality. I can imagine that. So what is in place for you guys for retaining these individuals once you have them in your district?
So part of it is a professional learning committee. So we have PLCs. And so it's the networking that happens within that group. But we've also have been doing seminars where, what is it like to do a leadership story, almost like your elevator speech, practicing that with your colleagues and making sure that you have that straight. And then kind of putting them in situations where, all right, if you were to become the new chief in this area, and then they want you to be partnering with other stakeholders like aldermen or politicians, are you going to be ready to get up there and speak quickly? And what does that look like? So we kind of put scenarios where they could role play and practice this on the spot, kind of just interview in a sense. Because one thing they have to understand is that no matter what, you're always in an interview, whether you like it or not. So that's part of it. The other part of it is making sure their resumes and their cover letters are really hitting what we're looking for in the district. And then from there, it's a matter of, all right, what is it that makes you, separates you from the rest of the pack, right? So that's been a huge thing, part of the PLC. So each person in a cohort has to develop a leadership story, has to develop these role playing that we do, and then we continue to unpack their resumes. And then the final thing we do is look at their leadership development, what it looks like. And so we've been using something called ICI, which is interrelational and intra-relational, and the content. So what are things that you're lacking that you know that you need to learn? So it might be in the content, I don't know, special education. Well, how are you going to go about learning about special education? What can we do to support you? What books are you going to read? Whereas interrelational is more like, how do other people see you? How are you, when you speak, how do you feel that they think about you? And as you speak, are you being very genuine or not? So that's the kind of stuff that we're trying to make sure that they create in their LDP, their leadership development plan, as we get them prepared and then retaining them. And from what I know in the cohort I have, they have said this in itself has been so impactful for them, because they said never in their lives have they had anyone really guide them and show them what is needed. And now they're feeling empowered by this.
That's really ironic, because we do, in my school district, we do the very same thing. We call it a PDP, a professional development plan for them, and they do the same thing. So that's very interesting to hear that. So another thing that I wanted to really talk about is school climate and school culture. As an educational leader, we know that having a school climate, school culture that's conducive to teaching and learning is critical to the advancement of our instructional program. What is it that you can say that either your district or your network is doing to really promote positive school climate, a positive school culture from the principalship and throughout the whole network?
So one thing with Network 8, a vision of mine, and I've been stating it in any of my talks, is about sense of belonging. And what does it mean to have the sense of belonging? So the one way I kind of stated is, when do you feel that you belong? And many times we think about our family, many times we think about our friends, and where we feel comfortable enough. And so we start thinking, like, tell me a little bit more of what that feels like. And do our children feel that way when we go into our schools? And if not, what are we doing to make sure that our families and our students walk in saying, I'm at home, that I feel very comfortable here, I feel a sense of belonging. And so that's been something that I've been really stressing in everything that we've been doing. And part of it is I've been using some of Bambrick's work, Paul Santoyo, Bambrick Santoyo, where he looks at culture. And that in itself is about role playing too. So it's, how are we practicing before the actual time children come in? So it's practice makes perfect. So if we're saying that children are going to line up in the auditorium or in the cafeteria, let's practice with our teachers as if they were the students, so that everyone understands what are the guidelines, what's the protocol, what's the schedule. So by the time our children arrive, we have it so perfect that our children have no other way but to understand that we developed this culture, and it's about adults developing a positive culture and not children. And this, because many times when children do that and we allow it, that's on us. That's on the adults. But that's the stuff that we've been using and making sure that they receive, and all of them have the book of Get Better Faster from Bambrick as well. And that we were just practicing it. I have to say one thing, I don't see, when I think about all my students, I don't see the classrooms that are, sometimes people talk about Chicago, there's terrible classrooms. Our children are ready to learn. Our children are eager. They sit there. They're like, give me more. I'm excited about our children. And it's a matter of just developing our teachers.
That's absolutely true. And you really touched on something that most urban school districts really have to deal with, and that's the negative press that we get. Because as in any school, there are things that happen, and it's just not necessarily the good things that come out.
Yeah.
So what do you guys do as a district to make sure that your positive story is being told? Because the negative is going to be told, whether you want it or not. And so it's really the struggle and the onus on the school district, the schools, the leaders in those school districts to really tell their story, to let everyone else know it's not what you see on the news at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock. So what are you all doing as a concerted effort to make sure that those positive things are getting out?
Yeah, so I'm excited about our new CEO, Dr. Jackson. One of the things she has put out there is that she tells our principals, share your stories. And so that way it gets out with the CPS newsletters. But we also have something called the fund, which is the principal fund, the Chicago Principal Fund, which goes out there and acknowledges these star principals and tells their stories and things that are happening in their school that are great. So that's another form of making sure that it's out there. And then finally, myself as a network, one of the things this January, I said, you know what, I have to do a better job in showing what's happening in my 26 schools. And so through LinkedIn, I've been really trying to post all of my schools as, you know, what's happening there, whether it's a community meeting, whether it's something that one of my principals did and working with guided reading and helping and supporting our parents, knowing like what can you do at home, to a career fair and showing what the great work that's happening in our schools because of that negative press. And that was one thing one of my principals had said, like, we never had a chief to really acknowledge us in that way, to champion us and to really show our talent. But it's not only about them, it's about the children as well. And so the last thing I was going to mention is that I have done every year something called On the Table, where it's the student voice. And what is student voice? What does it look like? So I have 6 high schools. We invite all our high schools to get together, and there's always one topic at hand that we talk about. So it might be something about philanthropy, and it might be something in regards to the violence that's happening in the streets. This time around, it's going to be more of how can we empower our parents further and making sure that their voice is heard and coming from the voice of our students. But then we're going to have a separate one just for the parents as well and talking about our student voice. Because as of right now, everything that's been happening with the gun violence and guns in schools, our children are being empowered, and they should be. And so it matters to me to hear what they're thinking. So it may even be part of a play. It might be part of their music that they're doing, that sometimes they're interpreting what's going around them. It's confusing for us as adults, so we can imagine what it is for our children.
Absolutely. And that really leads me to my next question about parent engagement. Again, with urban school districts, that is one of the challenges, is making sure that we are creating a space where parents can be engaged and a part of our community. What are some of the things that you all are doing, again, either in the district or in your network, that really engages parents and invite them in to our school community?
Yeah. So I'll go back to our CEO, our Dr. Jackson. She does have parent groups that come in and talk to her as well. So it's almost like an advisory group that she does. And there's always a forum for parents to also speak up once a month on a Wednesday. But our principals and our network do something called like Coffee with the Principal. And so that occurs various different times for different principals, where parents can come in and kind of voice their opinion there. I myself have done a State of the Network where all my parents from all the schools show up. I provide what's happening with our data. I provide what we're planning on doing, what's our vision with the sense of belonging, things that we're going to try to tweak, and making sure that their voices are being heard. Afterwards, we do have the coffee that happens, and then they get to speak to me personally. And so the last, we're going to end the year with the On the Table, which is May 8th, and bringing our parents in to say, okay, let's now talk about this engagement further, and what would you like to see in Network 8? And keeping in mind that most of my parents speak Spanish as well. So there's something to be said about Latino parents, especially Mexican parents. They always feel like the teacher knows more than them. And so they're always like, very courteous and saying, you know what, you know best. And sometimes I try to tell them, you know what, you got to push our teachers. It's okay to believe in them and have faith in them. And I'm very grateful for that. But it's also okay to push them and say, this is what I'm looking for further. And I have to try to change that kind of a culture. It's just part of the Mexican culture. And knowing that I myself am Mexican, I tell them, it's okay. They're not going to be mad at you. They're just we're here to listen. And if you are saying you would like to see more of engagement in the classroom or volunteering, then say it. Say what's in your heart, and not just saying it's okay.
I love that. And that leads me to my next question. You are a first-generation college student. And so that must be very impactful. Talk to me a little bit about that.
I come from very humble backgrounds. My mother did not work, and I had a father who worked 3 jobs, and they raised 4 children. And one of the things, and I could maybe, in a sense, I could have been sheltered as well too, because basically they told us, we're here in this country. I was born in the United States, but they came saying, we're here for you to make a better life. So you're here for your education. My parents did not understand the concept of college. They understood the concept of schooling. And so they sent us to school, but it really was my high school that started talking about college. And it was through my high school teachers that I felt like this was the route I'm going to go. And that says a lot about the power of a teacher, and being that right in front of me to say, you know what, this is your choice. Your only choice is to go to college. And so there I go. I go to college, and then realizing what else is out there in the world, meeting new people in college. It was a culture shock to me. It was, there was just so much to learn, and I was very excited to be there, that I knew immediately that education was going to be my life. And I also knew that I was going to continue it, and I'm still continuing it, because we're constant learners. So it really was just my parents saying, this is what you're going to school, but then after that, the teacher saying, you're going to college. And now I have 2 children of my own, where always, I basically spoke about, you're going to college from kindergarten on. My daughter, my firstborn, is now in graduate school. So it's just, it's that cycle that needs to happen, that I want to continue to happen within our schools. And so that means when we have those times for our children to talk, saying there are other choices, and it's not the street. And I understand we all have crosses to bear, but there's also us to support you, to get you through it. And normally it just takes that one person to tell you that.
Wow, that's really impactful, really impactful. And so my question from that is, with that being the first generation going to college, and now you've instilled that in your own children, how do you transfer that to your students, to the students in your network? And I'm sure that has to come through the principals, but how is that filtrated through so that your students know that that is a viable option for them?
You started from kindergarten. You have to start it in kindergarten. And so one of the things I have told my principals is making sure that there's a college day each week where we talk about college on the PA system. We talk about our teachers and where they graduated from college. It might be something on their door that says, this is where I went to college, ask me about it. And acknowledging that our teachers are professionals, and because many times they get a bad rap as well too, and looked upon as not a career or profession. But realizing that once we put that up there, that they have a bachelor's degree and a master's degrees on their windows, and students should come and talk to them about it. Forming student councils in schools, and making sure that student councils make sure that there's college visits with the student council, making sure that from kindergarten on, the field trips are related in the sense of, if you're going to a field trip, these are questions and prompts that you ask to say, how do I get that role if I want to become a biologist, if I want to become a paleontologist, whatever it is, and when they go to field trips. So these are the kind of questions that we have to starting from kindergarten on, so that it's not the first time, junior year, that you're hearing about college. You've been hearing about it since the time you were 5. And I know when I was a principal, that's something I always started in kindergarten, saying, well, you all know you're going to college. And the 5-year-olds look at me saying, yes, of course. If you hear it, it's going to happen. It's just going to happen. So
I love that.
That's where we start.
Absolutely. So my work is mainly with aspiring educational leaders, aspiring principals. So I work with first and second year assistant principals as a profession. And I always ask my seasoned educators and my educational leaders, what advice would you give to those sitting new principals, first and second year, that of course one day aspire to sit in the principal seat?
Wow. So there's a lot there, but the first thing I would say is self-care. I go to the self-care. When I had when I became a chief, there were 6 new principals, and I had told them to create something, even if it's a bucket, um, of all the things where children or teachers or parents thank them, because there's going to be hard times. It's not an easy role. And so that you could pick that up and look at your thank you card and remember why we do this, either from a child or for a parent, or from a teacher. Just keep your bucket close to you. And secondly, continue to learn. So as I mentioned, as the LDP, think about what you don't know, and you're going to do pockets of it each year. So if you think of if your role as a principal, don't get inundated with it, because there's just so much to do. And so it might be that you were always as myself, an upper grade teacher, and you were never in the early childhood grades, K-2. Immerse yourself in it. Get there, sit there, learn more, listen to your teachers, so that you become an expert on it. Maybe the following year it might be special education or bilingual education. Immerse yourself in it the following year. Take it in little chunks, so that by the time you are tenured and you have your legacy that's about to happen 3rd or 4th year, you now have that all behind you, and you could see how you progress. But that's the advice that I would give my first year principals.
I love that. Thank you. And this is Leadership Matters. And I always ask, why, in your opinion, does leadership matter?
Leadership matters because we strive and we are empowered many times by our leaders. We stay in our roles because of our leaders. We grow because of our leaders. And when we don't have the right leader, we tend to go, or we're not retained. And many times the retention happens because of the leader that's in front of you. And also allows you to grow, right? So I see it that way. And that's why when I look at all my principals, I keep telling them, you matter so much because of the teachers in front of you. And if we feed the teachers, they won't eat the students. And so it trickles down to our babies because of that leader in the school.
Absolutely. I love it. And so, Dr. Alvarez, is there a social media following that you have? Do you have any contact information that you would like to give out in case someone would like to follow you and see the wonderful work that you're doing in your network?
Yeah, I'm not much of a social media. I do go into LinkedIn. I'm on there and I'm posting on LinkedIn. You could find me on there. I believe it's under Elizabeth Alvarez. But I have no problem sharing my email address with them. I am trying to form a website now as Chief of Network 8. That's something that's in the works. And I have now hired a family and community engagement. I said, we're going to be tweeting. It's coming from Network 8. It's going to be something new to me. I don't know what to do with this. But my email address is ealvarez1@cps.edu. I'd love to hear from anybody. So, yeah, we're here.
I love it. And I so thank you for taking the time out. And I understand that you all had a little snow yesterday in April. So you can't quite get those spring temperatures yet. So I definitely appreciate you taking the time out and sharing with us all of your wonderful things that are happening in CPS and your network. So thank you, Dr. Alvarez. I really appreciate you.
Thank you to you. And it's been a wonderful time.
Absolutely. And guys, thank you all for joining us. And thank you for those of you who are going to catch the replay as well. We appreciate you as always. And remember, leadership matters.
Yes.